This is your year to ring in the deals and ring in the keys to your brand new ride during our Ring in the Savings event at Capital Ford. Like a new 2025 Ford F-250 Super Duty with 0% APR for 60 months. Or a new 2025 Ford Bronco Sport. Just $495 a month lease for 36 months with no money down. This is your year, so drive into 2026 the right way during our Ring in the Savings event at Capital Ford in Santa Fe.
Hey, what's going on, Lobo Nation? We welcome you to another episode of the Pit Press Podcast. UNM men's basketball defeats Sam Houston 107-83 in the first round of the NIT. They will take on George Washington, who defeated Utah Valley last night, also 69-68. I am Nick Nunez. I am joined by Liam Marcoux of the GW Basketball Insiders podcast, covers George Washington basketball. Liam, thank you for joining me tonight, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on this podcast in front of maybe a different audience than I would otherwise be talking to.
Absolutely, man. Same here. I'm excited to talk to you about George Washington basketball. Let's just start with a general overview of the Revolutionaries. So, from what I saw, George Washington 19-15 on the season, 8-10 in Atlantic 10 conference play. They got to the quarterfinal round of the Atlantic 10 tournament where they lost to St. Louis, who's playing in the NCAA tournament today. Just give us kind of an overview, man, of George Washington, their identity as a basketball team, their style of basketball. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, this was a team that had pretty high expectations heading into the season. A team that honestly hasn't been very good for the last few years. And I think this is year 4 for Chris Caputo, GW's head coach. And this was kind of expected to be the year where they would be able to kind of compete in the Atlantic 10 and, maybe even make the NCAA tournament. Obviously, that didn't happen. They often like to play pretty fast. They're pretty analytically driven. They're going to take a lot of shots at the rim and a lot of three-pointers. They have a lot of talent on the team. They've struggled a lot in close games, which was sort of a demon they sort of exercised a little bit against Utah Valley with a big Tyrone Marshall block at the very end of the game. But the last 3 games, they've blown a very large first-half lead, roughly about 20 points each game. First up was Fordham, then St. Louis, then Utah Valley. This is a good team. This is a team that can, that can make some shots, and they do have some talented players. But the end-of-game situations have been a problem, and that's why they were 8-10 in A10 play, along with an injury to Raphael Castro, their best player, who was out for pretty much all of February. But it's a good team, but a team that, has repeatedly struggled in close games.
Yeah, so Liam, I want to pull up George Washington's Ken Pom profile. Usually, man, when you see a team like this with a Ken Pom overall rating of 82, and you see all the green here on the left side of the screen, usually, man, a team like that doesn't have a record of 19-15. And their net ranking, I was looking at it today. I know this changes from day to day, but they're 91 in the net. So I'm just kind of like scratching my head, and maybe you can help me out a little bit. I know you said that they've lost a lot of close games, but what's kind of been the problem with the Revolutionaries as to why their Ken Pom and their net says that they're a really good team, but their record says they're just above 500?
Yeah, well, it's like I said, it's a lot of the close game losses. I think a lot of what did it also is they really beat the brains in of some of these teams they played in the non-conference schedule. Right. Like they were, dropping 100 on teams and really kind of boosting themselves analytically early in the season. And they even had a few games in conference play where they did that, but they really haven't gotten blown out this year. Even against, I think probably the best team they've played this year is St. Louis, who they played twice and had a big lead on twice, and then gave it up. But yeah, it's somewhat of a mystery to, GW fans too, is kind of, this is clearly a good team, but I'm not sure if I would say that the eye test matches exactly where they are in the analytics. But the reason they got into this tournament, into the NIT, is because their analytics were good. I don't think it's very common for a team that comes in 9th place in the Atlantic 10 to get into the NIT, but the analytics really liked GW, and they got in the NIT and they won a game. So there you go.
Yeah, for sure, man. Let's talk about the Atlantic 10 conference. I look at the Atlantic 10 and I think of it as like the Mountain West of the East Coast. And maybe you guys think of the Mountain West as the Atlantic 10 of the West Coast. But there's a lot of good teams in the Atlantic 10. I mean, you got St. Louis, who made the tournament, VCU, who's playing North Carolina right now. I don't know if they're going to pull that one out. But the Lobos played at VCU earlier this year in Richmond. It was a really close game. Could have went either way. But just kind of tell us, man, I know you said they lost some close games in Atlantic 10 conference play, but I mean, they were up 21 points on St. Louis in the quarterfinal and blew it. It seems like G-Dub was very competitive in their conference this year.
Yeah, they were. It's like I said, they didn't really get blown out in many games. They had a few kind of weird games where they lost by a bit of a bigger margin, but they've been, especially for big games against, teams that are on paper, probably going to be harder to beat, which I would say New Mexico fills that sort of definition. They've been locked in. They've been ready to play, and they've come to play. But the Atlantic 10 is. I love the Atlantic 10. I mean, I went to GW for reasons other than basketball, and kind of fell in love with the Atlantic 10 and GW basketball in the process.
Yeah.
But yeah, GW has played some very entertaining games this year as well. The Utah Valley one last night was really the first one that they've won, maybe with the exception of South Florida, who they beat in the second game of the season. Yeah. But they've played a bunch of close games. They've played a bunch of very exciting games. That first St. Louis game, Robbie Avila hit a kind of step back three with very little time left to win the game, which some GW fans were posing a few questions of maybe the defense from Raphael Castro there. He was maybe hunting for a block a little bit. But they played a bunch of very exciting games. The game they played against Duquesne was also really good. So I wouldn't be surprised if this game ends up coming down to the wire.
I'm speaking with Liam Marcoux of GW Basketball Insiders. Liam, wanted to shift gears and ask you a little bit about GW's personnel. I'm going to start with kind of the first guy on the roster, Trey Autry, who's a three-point shooter, man. And like we talked about, G-Dub shoots a ton of three-pointers. I think as a team, they've shot over 930 on the season through 34 games. So you do the math, they're shooting about 28 threes a game. That's top 30 in NCAA Division I. But if you look at this guy, Trey Autry, this guy made 6 threes last night against Utah Valley. And I'm just putting his profile up, a 6'4 guard, 210, a junior. And what can you tell us about Trey Autry's game?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that sticks out is that he's a good three-point shooter. He's going to take a lot of three-pointers. I would be remiss not to mention that he's actually the son of Syracuse's now former head coach, Adrian Autry, Red Autry. And he's been at GW for 3 years. It seems like he'll probably be back for a fourth year, so he'll be the first GW player in a pretty long time to do, come in as a freshman and leave as a senior, which is increasingly rare these days.
Definitely.
But he's a good player. He'll hit some. He's kind of been the closest thing GW has to sort of a clutch shooter. As I mentioned, they sort of have struggled in clutch moments, but I wouldn't be surprised if they go to him in a big moment. There have been some people that have, including myself, who've kind of been asking for him to maybe drive to the basket a little bit more. So if that's something you see from him, then, maybe things are going GW's way and he's able to kind of convert on some of those.
Yeah.
He can be a bit of I don't know if showboater is the right term, but he's not afraid to, turn to the fans and to the student section and do a little. His celebration recently has been sort of like a bird sort of thing.
Yeah.
You may have seen it in the Utah Valley game last night.
Yep.
He actually I believe he started doing that at the St. Joe's game, which is notably they're the Hawks. So there was some argy-bargy maybe that went on in that game. And then I was actually kind of surprised that he continued to do it. So if he hits a few three-pointers, don't be surprised if he starts talking to some Lobos fans.
Yeah, I saw that last night because I didn't catch the whole game, but I did watch some of it on replay. And I think he hit a buzzer beater at the end of the first half, a three or close to a buzzer beater. And he did that. He did his little bird celebration. So I'm excited to see that, man. We'll talk about the atmosphere in the pit here in a little bit. We got 7,286 people to show up to the building, which was the most by any NIT game. I think it doubled it. So it's not the pit crowds that we're used to getting, but it'll be interesting to see if he brings out those celebrations. The next guy I wanted to ask you about is Raphael Castro. And I don't know if we call him G-Dub's best player. I think he was second team all A10. You can probably educate our viewers on some of his other accolades, but this is a guy, 15.9 points per game, about 8.8 rebounds per game. He's their inside presence, a 6'11 senior. What can you tell us about Raphael Castro?
Yeah, Raphael Castro transferred from Providence at the beginning of last season, and he's honestly since then it's been a little surprising how well he's done. He was, I think, a few people thought he was snubbed from first team All A10 last year. He was expected to be first team All A10 this year. He was hurt for all of February with a foot injury, so he didn't get it. But he was on. He made the All Defensive team. He is a very good player. He's probably the most offensively, offensively talented big man GW has had in a very long time. But he's also a very strong defensive player. He will impact the game. He will get a bunch of blocks. I think I mentioned earlier that there was a late game situation earlier this season where he was block hunting. But even if he's not getting blocks, he's got that sort of. I mean, I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm a little too young to have watched Hakeem Olajuwon in his prime. But he's got that Hakeem Olajuwon, those tendencies where he gets a lot of blocks, he gets a lot of steals, and I'll stop the Hakeem Olajuwon, comparison because obviously it's on a pretty different level. But Castro's a very good player. If GW is able to get him going, they will have success. The one thing he has struggled at is free throw shooting, particularly late game free throw shooting. Although that's sort of something that he did not struggle with against Utah Valley. He was 8 for 10. So I doubt that those troubles are behind him, but he's a good player. The biggest weakness is free throw shooting.
Dude, let me tell you, man, Lobo fans and free throw shooting, we understand the woes in our Mountain West Conference semifinal that we lost to San Diego State in Las Vegas. We were 15 to 28 from the line. So, and it's a 2-point loss, right? 2-point loss and you miss 13 free throws. You're just shooting yourself in the foot. Man, we could go down the list of G-Dub's roster. The thing that stands out to me, though, I'm going to put this up on the screen. This is their team stats from their website. I mean, what I see, man, is a roster that has 7, 8, 9 guys that are averaging 8 points per game. I mean, you look at this over here in the right-hand column. You got Castro at 15.6, Garrett Johnson at 11.4, Trey Autry, who we talked about, 11.1. But all the way down the list to this guy, and you can probably help me with the pronunciation of his name, number 7. But they got 7 guys that are averaging 8 points per game or more. This just seems like a team that thrives on balanced scoring.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. That guy's name is pronounced Jean Aranguren. He's actually Venezuelan. Apparently, the UVU broadcast was saying that they went out to dinner after shoot around, and he was very excited because of the Venezuela win over the U.S. in the World Baseball Classic. So, Anyway, there you go. But yeah, they have very balanced shooting or very balanced scoring, I guess. There's a bunch of players who can kind of hurt you. The one thing I would note is that Luke Hunger, number 33, did not play with a foot injury against Utah Valley. He has been, towards the end of the season, GW was sort of employing a double big lineup with Luke Hunger and Raphael Castro starting at the same time. Luke Hunger had I think he was probably the best player in the Atlantic 10 in the month of February. He was, before that, pretty much a backup, and he was fine and, would shoot a few three-pointers and make some of them and miss some of them. But he was he averaged almost 20 points a game. He had a 3-game stretch where he set a career high, did it again, and then did it again. So if he's able to play, he'll be an impactful player for GW, but it's unclear whether he will be able to or not.
Got you, man. Okay. Well, we've kind of gone through their personnel, some of the main guys that make them go. Maybe we should switch gears and talk about last night's game. 69-68 G-Dub wins on the road at Utah Valley. And to our followers, you guys should check out the GW Basketball Insiders. You can find that on YouTube. Liam and a couple of his other buddies do a really good job of covering G-Dub. But you guys went live last night, got quite a few viewers. And, man, a 1-point game. I stopped watching at halftime. G-Dub was up by 16 points. And you've talked about it. They've had second-half collapses in multiple games this season. What's the cause of that? Why is it that G-Dub cannot finish games in the second half?
It's at this point, I think it's mostly a mental thing, but it's hard to pin down to exactly one thing. I honestly think something that played a big factor last night that hasn't played a factor in their other games, but will likely play a factor against New Mexico is the elevation. I know that New Mexico is, at higher elevation than Utah Valley, but that's just not something that a team from the East Coast really has to handle at all. So they were really good in the first half. I think UVU started getting a few more shots than a few better shots in the second half. They were taking more shots inside. GW wasn't hitting as many threes in the second half, but they just kind of tense up down the stretch there. It's just, it becomes a close game, and you see it on the bench. They're kind of a little nervous, like, oh man, are we about to lose this game?
Right.
So it's sort of a bit intangible, but there you see some of Castro's kind of shot blocking ability. But yeah, it's a little hard to pin down, but they just, I guess, get a little nervous. So it's very frustrating for fans to watch. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I hear you, man. And just kind of take us through how that second half went. I mean, when you're up 16 and it seemed like George Washington was shooting the ball really well in the first half. I read a couple recap articles as to kind of what happened in that game. I mean, Utah Valley's a good team. I know you guys talked about it on your podcast last night. They were one possession away from being in the NCAA tournament. But kind of what happened in that second half that allowed Utah Valley to get back in the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think they started the second half pretty strong. It's been a bit of a problem for GW this year. Sometimes coming out of the break, they've just kind of gotten punched in the mouth a little bit. And that's something that Utah Valley was able to do. GW, I think, probably took a few too many three-pointers. They maybe could have, they're a team that likes to play fast and kind of get a lot of shots and speed up the tempo. But I don't know. I wonder if maybe in a situation where you're up 16 points at halftime, you maybe are a little more patient and things like that. They also had a little bit of foul trouble. Jean-Aaron Gurin, I think, had 4 fouls less than halfway into the second half. But, it's kind of one of those things where it just seems to happen in all these GW games where they get out to a big lead and they're playing great. And it's now become a thing among GW fans where, they went up 21 on St. Louis. They actually were up 24 at the highest point. And, we were all messaging each other and saying, they're going to find a way to lose this game. They're going to find a way, at the very minimum, to, throw this lead away, which is really not a good thing, obviously. So I think there's some of it that comes down to coaching. We'll see if there's any kind of changes to the assistant, the bench in terms of assistants this year. But I think it's just sort of a mental thing at this point. And once the boulder starts rolling down the hill, it's really hard to kind of stop that.
Yeah, man. And maybe one observation I can offer is, teams that play this kind of style where they like to play downhill. If you look at G-Dub's Ken Pom profile, I don't know where they are in adjusted tempo, but they do like to push the ball. Teams that like to push the ball, shoot a lot of threes. It's almost like if you're not playing that same way throughout the entire game, you almost don't know how to play, right? Like if you need to play a half-court possession and get a quality shot and not turn the ball over, it's kind of hard if you're used to playing downhill in transition, shooting threes. So maybe that's one of the issues. I don't know. But how did G-Dub handle the elevation last night? I mean, I heard you guys talking about it. Orem, Utah, I think, is a little over 5,000 feet of elevation. And, I mean, G-Dub, at least in the first half, it didn't seem like it bothered them at all. They seemed like the team that had more wind as the course of the game went on. Did you think that was a factor?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to exactly quantify how much of a factor it was, especially when you have the aspect of them just kind of choking away all of these close games with or without the elevation. But I certainly saw it in the second half that they sort of started struggling a little bit more. They got to Utah. They only got to Utah the day before. So obviously the NIT is a bit of a quick turnaround, but they didn't have a lot of time there. They stuck around in Salt Lake City today, and they practiced at the Jazz facility. I'm assuming they're going to head to Albuquerque tomorrow. So in theory, they'll be a little bit more adjusted to the elevation, but it's you can't just flip a switch and get it adjusted to that elevation. It's pretty tough to deal with. So I think you have that, against New Mexico, you'll have that plus, the big crowd and the, all of the fans that'll be there, which is just not something that GW really experiences, especially at home games.
Yeah, for sure, man. Real quick, and then I do want to talk about the atmosphere. I wonder where G-Dub is going to practice and get ready for the game when they do get to Albuquerque, if it is tomorrow that they land here. The pit, the arena that we play in, it's booked up tomorrow and Saturday, and not just the pit, but UNM's practice facilities as well are booked up because the high school state spirit and dance competition is all at the pit there. So, yeah, man, it's so hard with the – yeah. Well, you live on the East Coast, man, so, you guys have all these venues, and, Albuquerque is kind of a rural city, so to speak, and so it's very spread out. There's not a ton of sports venues here. And so the Pit, funny thing, we're having an issue on whether or not we can host a third round NIT game or a quarterfinal round because PBR for Ty Murray, that's the bull riding, they have that at the Pit as well. And so it's like the Pit is kind of the convention center, if you will, the venue that New Mexicans use a lot of the time for lots of other things. I mean, there's a Native American powwow that they have here, or they used to have here. I don't think they're going to have it this year. But anyway, man, it'll be interesting to see, where G-Dub does find a practice facility. I'm sure there's tons of gyms here in Albuquerque that they'll find. Yeah, man, wanted to ask you about the atmosphere a little bit. The Pit, Lobo fans certainly do take pride in that. We were top 25 in attendance this year, and that's something that we've been for, I think, the last few years. The building seats 15,411. We had one sellout this season against San Diego State. I don't know what our average attendance was. I think it was a little over 12,000. So what we got in the Pit last night, 7,286, was only half of what we normally get. With this being a Sunday game, I would expect there to be a little bit more. I would guess maybe around 9,000. It'd be great if they could get 10. But what kind of experience does GW have playing in any atmosphere like that in the Atlantic 10 or in their non-conference schedule?
Yeah, we mentioned the elevation. They don't have any experience playing at elevation except for the Utah Valley game. In terms of those bigger crowds and, especially in bigger arenas, they played at Dayton this year. They played at VCU this year. They played at St. Louis this year. So they actually played, interestingly, they played a, what was dubbed a neutral site game in basically Fort Lauderdale at the Florida Panthers arena against the University of Florida, which obviously was heavily, Gators fans. So they have some experience playing in, bigger atmospheres. I don't know how it'll match up against the Pit, but we'll see. So they have somewhat of that experience. I said earlier they've been up for big games. So, I would be pretty surprised if GW comes out and, absolutely gets their doors blown off. I think they'll at least be competitive, but it's definitely going to be an uphill battle.
Yeah, for sure, man. And it's interesting because UNM has, at least down the stretch of the Mountain West Conference season, had terrible starts in games. They didn't start well in the Mountain West Conference semifinal against San Diego State. They've given up big double-digit leads kind of down the stretch. And, I mean, G-Dub is a team that, seems like they start out very strong, typically going up double digits on a lot of their opponents in their last few recent matchups. I mean, UNM against Sam Houston, and I know I was listening to you guys, and I think you guys checked out part of the game. I mean, UNM was up 16-7 at the first media timeout. So they were just ready to play and locked in defensively. So it'll be interesting to see, man, who kind of comes out stronger those first 4 minutes of the game. But let's switch gears, man, and let's talk about the matchup itself. UNM, good win last night against Sam Houston. They finished third in the Mountain West Conference tournament. They've won now 24 games on the season. And I heard you guys give UNM some respect last night, said this is an NCAA tournament caliber team. Just what are your initial thoughts on the Lobos from what you've seen?
My initial thoughts are that they're really good, and I wish that they made the NCAA tournament over some of these, milquetoast Power 5 teams, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way. Yeah. But obviously I have a lot of respect for them. I actually have a lot of respect for their coach. I'm a big fan of Eric Olin. GW played them a few years ago when GW played UC San Diego a few years ago when they were transitioning to D1, and UC San Diego from the jump played GW off the floor. It was under a different coach. I believe it was the last year of the Jamian Christian era.
Okay.
But yeah, I've got a lot of respect for Eric Olin as a coach, and obviously New Mexico as a team and as a program. So, it's an exciting opportunity for GW to play these teams that they wouldn't really otherwise play. I know a lot of GW fans are actually talking about I believe it was first round of the 1993 NCAA tournament when GW beat New Mexico. So they're hoping to recreate that. Yeah, it was 82-68.
Okay.
GW actually, that was the furthest that year was the furthest they've ever been in the NCAA tournament. They made the Sweet 16 that year.
Wow. Okay.
So GW fans hoping to recreate that, but a lot of respect for the New Mexico program and a lot of excitement to play in an atmosphere and against a team like New Mexico.
Yeah, man, for sure. Just kind of your thoughts on the matchup, the way these teams match up. I'm looking, just kind of flipping back and forth between UNM's Ken Palm profile and G-Dub's Ken Palm profile. Like I mentioned, the adjusted tempo, both teams like to push the ball when they can. GW is 84th in adjusted tempo, and New Mexico is 49th, so they're pretty close. They're pretty close in adjusted efficiency offensively. GW is a very good offensive rebounding team. Lobos have had to deal with those issues throughout the season. But what do you think kind of the keys to the matchup are maybe for both teams?
Yeah, I mean, the first one that sticks out to me is turnovers, which is something we also circled during the Utah Valley game and something they struggled with a little bit, but they were able to keep in check a little bit. There have been times when GW is just a little loose with the ball and kind of careless. I don't know how much New Mexico is going to maybe try some full court pressure, but that's something that GW had struggled with at times this year. They had a game against Dayton where they had 3 10-second violations in the same game and had 20 plus turnovers. So they've struggled a little bit. They don't really have a true point guard. They've got people that'll bring the ball up the court, but not someone who you can, every possession rely on to kind of have the ball. I think if GW, it seems like New Mexico probably let GW take, a decent amount of threes. So if GW is able to hit some of those threes or able to kind of hit them, especially at the rate that they were hitting them against Utah Valley, then maybe they could be in luck. You mentioned the offensive rebounding. That's a strength of Raphael Castro. So if he's able to be active on the offensive glass and, getting to the free throw line a lot. I know he said he doesn't shoot well from the free throw line, but he does get there a lot. So that would, be a good sign for GW.
Yeah, man, for sure. And then, the offensive rebounds, GW is 24th in the country in Ken Palm's offensive rebound percentage. And I heard the broadcasting team last night was talking about, you guys shoot so many threes. I mean, you guys shoot 28 threes a game, long shots, long rebounds. I'm sure Castro is a huge part of the offensive rebounding that GW gets. But when you got that many threes, man, it's just kind of the law of averages tells you you're going to get some extra possessions. What about the matchup I kind of want to watch is Raphael Castro and Tomislav Buljan. Tomislav Buljan, second team All Mountain West Conference for UNM. He's got 16 double-doubles on the season. I think he had 22 points, 10 rebounds last night against Sam Houston. He's not your traditional back-to-the-basket big. He does have a little bit of a low post game, but he's been interviewed multiple times by our local media here in Albuquerque, and he says, I'd like to think of myself more as a forward than I would as a back-to-the-basket center, rather. But what are your thoughts on that matchup, man, Raphael Castro and Tomislav Buljan?
Yeah, I mean, Castro has guarded a variety of different types of big men this year. He's not afraid to kind of get out on the perimeter, and he's not, the best, he's not like an elite perimeter defender or anything like that, but he can certainly hold his own. So I think it'll be a really interesting matchup. Castro is long, he's agile, he's able to kind of move well and sometimes time when he's going to go impact a shot. So, I think it'll be a pretty good matchup. And, we'll see. I know that Raphael Castro is always excited to play against these other elite big men. Robbie Avila was the big one in the Atlantic 10 this year. So I'm sure that he will be up for the matchup, and I'm sure that Buljan will be as well.
For sure, man. Last one I'll give you on UNM's personnel. Jake Hall, Mountain West Freshman of the Year, set a school record for 109 made three-pointers in a single season. Went 4 of 8 from deep last night. Really good three-point shooter. He's turned into kind of an elite scorer from all areas on the floor. Everyone kind of thinks, he just shoots threes. I mean, he's got a really quick release, but he can put the ball on the floor, score in the mid-range, and sometimes get to the basket as well. He's UNM's leading scorer. Defenses down the stretch of the season have really keyed in on him and tried to not let him get free or get clean looks. How do you think GW defends a guy like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably with Christian Jones. He's either Christian Jones or Jean Aranguren have kind of been GW's better defenders along the perimeter this year. But I don't know. We will see. There have been times when they've kind of struggled against players that can get hot from three. And, sometimes they make the wrong decision on whether to go under or over the screen. Last year, they were very aggressive switching. So don't be surprised if maybe they start kind of switching everything.
Yeah.
It's an interesting defensive wrinkle that they've thrown at some teams. So, I mean, I guess that kind of means that maybe Jake Hall will get a bit of a mismatch. Maybe he'll get a big man on him or something like that, which maybe he could take advantage of. But I think if GW had their choice, it would probably be Christian Jones or Jean Aranguren guarding guarding Hall.
We're speaking with Liam Marikou of GW Basketball Insiders podcast. Liam, one of the final questions for you, man. You gotta pick a winner tomorrow. Do you think GW comes into the pit and gets the win, or do you think it's the Lobos that advance in the NIT?
Oh, my head says the Lobos, but my heart has to say GW.
Sure.
I have to say that GW does currently have the longest NIT win streak in the country right now at 7 games.
Sure.
I should also probably note that the last time they played in the NIT before this year was 2016 when they won it. So
Okay.
that would be how they're doing that. But no, I think it'll be a good game. But ultimately, if you made me choose, I would probably pick New Mexico. And just because GW has played so many close games this year and lost a lot of them, I'll say New Mexico by 7 points.
Okay, fair enough, man. I'm looking to see what Ken Palm has this game predicted at. They have the Lobos winning 85-76, but you can never trust Ken Palm or even Vegas. I mean, Vegas had the Lobos as 11.5-point favorites last night against Sam Houston, and Lobos ended up getting a 20-point win. But Liam, please tell our listeners, our viewers, and our followers where they can find you and some of the other guys that you cover George Washington basketball from.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Liam LIAM _0___. So, and you can find my co-host for GW Basketball Insiders podcast, David Korn, on Twitter as well at David _Korn. That's KORN, and then 4 at the end. He's good. He does he's actually been doing some NBA draft coverage for local outlets in DC and stuff like that. And you can find the podcast. Department of Hoops is the name of the kind of organization that we work under. So you can look up either GW Basketball Insiders or Department of Hoops on YouTube. Look up GW Basketball Insiders on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And we also actually live stream our podcast on Twitter at Matt Moderno, who is the kind of owner of Department of Hoops. So that's MATTMODDERNO. I hope I spelled that right. But if not, you can just go to my Twitter, which is Liam _0__. Thank you so much for having me on. This was good. I hope that you guys learned something. I feel like I learned a lot about New Mexico.
Absolutely, man. We really appreciate you joining us. Lobo fans, second round game in the NIT in the pit on Sunday, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. UNM will take on George Washington in the second round of the NIT tournament. Be on the lookout for a live show tomorrow. Eric Moulton and Ed Nunez might dive further into George Washington. But this has been another episode of the Pit Press Podcast. Thank you for tuning in.